All right, welcome back to the IndeVets Happy Hour podcast. It's great to have everybody here again in Marissa's lovely home. I am your host, Dr. Andrew Heller. I'm here with Dr. Marisa Brunetti, and today we have a very special guest for you.
Very special.
Should I call him Dr. Michael Raphael?
Oh, yeah, he's definitely an honorary doctor.
He's an honorary. Well, Michael Raphael, he is our esteemed CEO at IndeVets. He's here with us today for the first time, and we're very happy about that. Michael has been at the helm of this great business that we've started a few years ago. I wanted to give him a chance to, introduce himself a little bit. Michael.
Hey guys, hello. Thanks for having me on the Happy Hour.
Thanks for being here, beer in hand.
Cheers.
Yeah, I'm virtual today, but I hope to be in Marissa's living room with you both soon. Right? That'd be more fun than this virtual stuff for sure. But thanks for having me. It's really an honor to be here. I've been listening to all the podcasts, and I am not a doctor. Of course, I'm not a veterinarian, but I've worked in veterinary medicine, the industry, for the last 12 years. And, I've picked up some of the expressions and all that stuff. But my experience has been on the business side. But, I've gotten to know a ton of veterinarians. And from my perspective, that's the best part about the work, is getting to know the great doctors who work with us and who are in the industry. I've said it many times before. If you have a chance to work in a lot of different businesses, there's businesses that make widgets and there's businesses that help pets feel better. Like, this one seems like a better one. And it's really one of the main reasons I love working in it. Great people, and it's a great industry.
Yeah. And when I met you back in 2017, I was introduced to you as like a guru in the industry, actually. And someone suggested that I meet you when I was looking to start my own my own practice. You quickly steered me away from that. Thank you. But
thanks for killing his hopes and dreams. Just kidding.
But I followed you into this, and I'm very happy I did. How did you first get into the vet field? Not being a veterinarian yourself, I know you've been in it for about, what did you say, 12 years now?
Yeah, it's been about 12 years, and the story of how I got involved with veterinary medicine starts with my background before, where I was working at a company where we would invest in lots and lots of different companies. And I always was kind of frustrated by it, because as a buyer of businesses, I always felt like the sellers knew much more about their businesses than I did. And I had this idea. I wanted to, go really deeper into an industry. And you're sitting around, you're saying, what do we want to do? And again, working with veterinarians and with dogs and cats, I've had dogs my entire life. I have cats today. And so just from an interest perspective, it was there. And then, once you get to know the business and the industry, it's a great business. There's good people. So, we got excited. I had two business partners, and together we started a company called Community Veterinary Partners. And we bought an animal hospital in just outside Hershey, Pennsylvania. And I would drive out there from Philly, and I would, answer the phone at the front desk, and I would clean the cages, and I would help hold animals. I was really kind of terrible at all these jobs, but I did realize, got to know how an animal hospital works, and I loved it. And I just thought it was a lot of fun. We ended up, acquiring and buying more animal hospitals over the years. And one of the things that became really obvious if you work in animal health is that there are not enough veterinarians. And when we started Community Veterinary Partners back in 2010, if you put an ad out, you would get 10, 15 great resumes, and you could interview 5 people, and then you could have a choice of really great doctors. And, what happened over those years is we started to realize there weren't as many resumes coming in. And I also think we were really starting to see that doctors were, frustrated, overworked, and looking for, a different way to enjoy veterinary medicine. And so that was really the beginning seeds of IndeVets, and it's how we met, Andrew, back in the day.
Yeah, that's exactly how I remember you pitching it to me. actually. And I was hooked right away. I was definitely intrigued, and I thought you had something there, and I'm happy that I got to be a part of that. So thank you for inviting me in. So the goal of this episode today is actually not just to, shoot the shit with Michael, but talk about some key trends that are going on in the animal world, the animal industry. We write blogs on our website, and you recently wrote one called 4 Key Trends for Animal Hospitals in 2021. So I thought I'd have you come on and give us a little more depth and color for our audience and kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm happy. I mean, it's so interesting. If you look back on 2020, what happened, with the pandemic and with veterinary medicine, and when March hit and April, what we saw was, and we weren't alone, right? It was just not panic's probably too big a word, but just a lot of unknowns, right? And no one knew exactly how to do it. And one of the interesting things about veterinary medicine is it's in person, right? So this isn't the sort of thing you can do from your office. You have to go in, you have to see clients, you have to see patients. And so it's an interpersonal thing. And so when the virus hit, what we saw was a real big decline in, sort of business for our hospitals. But what was also interesting was that turned around really quickly. And what was driving that was the clear and obvious statement that veterinarians, veterinary workers were essential workers. And they are, right? Because, keeping pets healthy, particularly in today's world, that has to rank up high with important things for all of us, right? In terms of our own mental health and feeling good and keeping our pets healthy. So understandably, it's a smart move and the right move. And quickly we saw our animal hospitals adapt, right? And so they went to curbside and they put masks on and really started seeing the impact of the pandemic, which was not what we expected, right? I think we all expected things might slow down, but in a weird way, they took off. And so, that was 2020, and 2020 ended up being, I think the numbers I've seen, there's a lot of different numbers floating around, but 8, 9, 10% growth in terms of revenue from the previous year in the middle of a pandemic. So pretty amazing. So started looking at what do we think is going to happen in 2021, and talk to CEOs, who are in this industry and animal hospital owners. What's clear is there's really still high confidence in growth this year. William Blair, which is a research firm in New York that does, in Chicago, that does research on veterinary medicine and companies in our industry, they questioned, surveyed, I think it was 300 veterinarians and owners, and they were estimating, 5 to 10% growth this year. And if you talk to the big companies out there like NVA and those other ones, what they're telling you is that they're seeing the growth from last year just continue on from this year. So I think the question is why, right? Yeah. And one thing that's really clear is that veterinary medicine has been a growth industry for probably the last 50 years. And I went back and looked back to 1971. There hasn't been a recessionary year, right? A lack of growth in veterinary medicine going back to 1971. By the way, that's the year I was born, so that's why I picked.
I was like, wow, that was before I was born.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you, Marissa and Andrew. Probably many of you listening. But the reason I say that is because, it's just, this is consistent with the industry. But when you see something like this, it's kind of surprising. So what were the things that drove it? Well, I think, we all know that people were home more, right? And, when you're home more, you pay attention to your pets more. And so clearly people were seeing issues, with their pets, or concern about their pets and bringing them in. There was also big increased demand for pets in general, right? So people were adopting pets, they were, buying pets. I mean, it was everyone I knew, right? Seemed to be.
Yeah, I think I know 10 people at least 10 of my friends that have gotten new pets over this last year. It's been crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why when you say 5 to 10% growth, I'm like, that seems low to me. I mean, it feels like everybody I know just got pets. That would double. I only know 20 people, so
Well, I think, Andrew, I think that there's a reason to it though, which is that animal hospitals also just only have so much capacity.
Right.
And one of the interesting things in our industry, and clearly one of the things that we're trying to solve for at IndeVets, is helping expand that capacity by bringing great doctors to our partner hospitals so that they can expand their hours. Because the challenge that the animal hospitals are seeing, right, and we see it with all of our partner hospitals, is that they can't come close to filling the demand. Right. I took my own. I have two cats at home, Obi-Wan and Kit Fisto, Jedis. One a well-known Jedi, one a lesser-known Jedi, Kit Fisto. But they go to the VCA cat hospital just down the street from me here in Philadelphia. And I went in there. By the way, they're a partner hospital of ours, and they're awesome. They're really great there. It was curbside service, but Obi came back seeming pretty happy. But he needed some dental work done, right? He needed to have some cleaning and potentially some extractions. And this was before the new year, and they were booked on dentistry through May.
Oh yeah.
But that's what's going on, in our industry. So I think part of the challenge is I think these hospitals would grow more quickly, but there's not enough capacity on the doctor's side.
What I am always explaining to clients now is, although we were super busy during the pandemic, in the very beginning, if you guys remember, they were cutting us like non-essential services for us. And like dentistries, spays and neuters and mask removals are technically non-essential. And so we cut out a lot of procedures in the beginning of the pandemic. And so now
it caused a backlog.
It caused a backlog, and we're still seeing that in 2021. So I'm so sorry. I totally understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean,
no, that's a really good point.
So the four trends you cited for 2021 are high demand equaling a higher revenue, right? We just talked about that. Veterinary shortages, we just talked about that. And that revenue would probably be even higher if they had more vets to see more cases. Then you talk about increased consolidation by corporates. So can you talk a little bit about that? I know you come from that world.
I do. Guilty as charged. But one quick thing I do want to say about the veterinary shortage issue before we move on. So I ran across this really crazy stat from the AVMA recently, and they do this survey of doctor need and also advertising. And the AVMA runs a lot of the ads in our industry, right? So like the AVMA career page site, they have a lot of data, and they looked at all the ads that ran in 2020, and they can see how many people actually responded to those ads. And I was shocked. I mean, the data I saw when I looked at it was like 66, almost 2/3 of ads have no responses. The only reason I share that is because I don't think that this challenge is going anywhere. And I think that there are some real important reasons for that. Beyond the fact that, there are a lot of doctors, of boomers sort of age, baby boomers like who are retiring, right? And the veterinary, the colleges really can't keep up, right? But more importantly, and again, to me, this is like the crux of it. Doctors are getting burnout and they're dissatisfied with their day. And what that means is that they're going to part-time, or they're even like as sad as it sounds, giving up on medicine. And so it's not just the fact that like doctors are retiring and we're not maybe, putting enough doctors through veterinary school, but there are doctors, a big chunk out there who are just like, I don't want to do it anymore, which is like, to me, the biggest failure for all of us. And so it's again, as you guys know, it's one of the reasons we started the company and why we do the things we do. But I don't see an easy solution here, in the next few years.
But how do you explain, with so many new doctors coming out, why there is still a shortage overall?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the numbers, the number of retiring doctors, it's increasing. And you compare that to the number of doctors who are coming out of schools, it's actually relatively in balance. But I think there are a couple of big things that it doesn't take into account. One is, and Andrew, I think we're going to talk about this in a moment, the consolidation of the industry by corporate groups, right? So one of the things that's happening is a lot of doctor owners, are being bought by veterinary groups, and then they're retiring, right? So and I have a point of view. I think those owners work a lot of hours, and they're very productive, right? Because it's their own business. And so I think when you lose a doctor owner, I think you're losing like more than just one doctor, who worked, and we know in our industry, it's not just 40 hours a week, 50 hours, 60 hours. These are like big hours. And so I think that's like a hidden issue. And then I think, Marissa, the other one is just, I think, doctors are just, unfortunately, I think they're giving up a little bit on it because of the frustration, or maybe they have a new family that's getting started. And so you need to take time off. But there are a lot of, sort of like complementary things that are having to cause that problem.
Yeah, I think we interview a lot of doctors, and some people come to us and say they're working 45 to 50 hours a week, and that's full time for them, and they want to reduce to 35 to 40. So if a lot of doctors are doing that exact same thing, you're going to get a lot less productivity. And with corporatization of the industry, they're expanding hours, they're expanding days, they're open Saturdays and Sundays now. Now you've got less doctors trying to fill more shift time, and there's just a lot of gaps.
Yeah, well said.
You mentioned that 20% of practices are now corporate owned. What does that mean for the regular associate who wants to maybe buy a practice? Does that affect them?
If you go back 20 years ago, 25 years ago, the most common transactions, right, were doctor to doctor. So, an owner was selling to an associate at the practice maybe, or even like from somewhere else. And that was really most of what was going on. During that time, there's been this massive influx of investment and capital in corporate groups, right? So, the big ones that everyone might know are like VCA, or VetCor. But what's also happening here is that literally there are dozens of smaller regional corporate groups that are also buying up animal hospitals. And why are they doing it? Well, because again, it's a really good industry. It's a profitable industry and it's growing. And so there's a lot of interest. So I think that the challenge for a veterinarian today, who wants to be an owner, is that he or she is competing with a corporate buyer who is most likely going to be able to pay a lot of money and not be constrained by some of the things that an individual doctor might be in terms of their ability to pay. I think, so I think that's one challenge. And for doctors today who are starting out, I think the other part of this is that they're competing now with, sophisticated groups, right, who, can throw money at marketing and technology and new practice management systems and all the latest equipment. And so I think, as this trend continues, I think it does challenge the ability of that independent doctor, who is like the backbone of this industry, to be able to compete, effectively in the long run. I think it's a real risk. And I think it's also why we focus a lot of our work on partnering with independent practices. It's a big chunk of our business today, and it's something that's important to me because I think supporting those independent owners is super important.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it seemed crazy. In your blog, you said something about up to 20 times the revenue these corporates are buying these practices for, and no person can compete with that kind of buying power.
That's insane.
So, I mean, if anybody wants to start a practice or buy a practice, they might as well just start one from the ground up, right? I mean, that seems to be the only way that they can compete, or partner with companies like Heart and Paw, right? Who give you some ownership, right?
Yeah.
Another one of our partners.
When I started working in our industry, prices for hospitals were sort of like 4 to 6 times earnings. That was really like it, and you didn't see much outside of that. And Andrew, you're right. 20 times is a crazy number, really, but it just shows how popular animal hospitals.
And that's times earnings, not revenue.
No, it's times earnings. But I mean, but I think you're right. If you have the interest and the energy and the drive to start your own practice, not only can you make it work, but like in the long run, you have a lot of options in terms of what you want to do with the hospital.
So the fourth trend for 2021 has to do with urgent cares, especially, and ER practices, which we are seeing a lot more of. And so when I came out of school, I don't remember ever seeing an ad for an urgent care for veterinary medicine. And so I'm intrigued by this trend. And so you say they're going to be growing. What is their model, and how is it different from ER and GP? And why? Why are they growing?
Well, Marissa, as our chief medical officer, I actually would love if you could help for the audience define the difference between urgent care and ER. I mean, yeah, there's some real basics there, right? But do me a favor, help me out. What are the big differences?
I don't know. Do we agree? I mean,
all right, maybe
sometimes
that was a really weak question I wrote down.
Sometimes we argue about the difference between urgent care and ER, and I actually this is a legit thing to talk about, because some hospitals call themselves urgent care, but they may be more ER. But to me, urgent care is a walk-in based general practice that is not open overnight. And so it differs from ER because it's not 24/7, and it differs from GP because they see walk-ins. But I will say most urgent cares are seeing the same things that GPs are seeing. They're just like walk-in. Do you agree?
I do. And it's really interesting because I was having a conversation with an ER leader. She oversees a team at one of the local specialty hospitals, and they are starting an urgent care track at their specialty hospital, because how they see it is that it's a lower acuity, right? So lower issues, less complicated issues. And she was interested in talking about it with us because it was a new line of business. But I'm with you. I mean, I think it's blurry. It's not all that clear. I think, and Marisa, I would sort of ask you also, which is, do our doctors see the urgent care shift differently than they see an ER shift? Is that another way to think about it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because I was not trained in ER, and obviously as a general practitioner, you see emergencies. I would more likely take an urgent care shift than I would take an ER shift, because I think the skills and the procedures that you do in urgent care are less than in an ER situation. So
yeah, that makes sense.
What to me, what this is really about is what we started talking about early on, which was that general practices are just slammed, right? And for all the reasons we talked about, they can't schedule enough. And I think what's happening is these urgent cares are starting up, and the ERs are also seeing the same thing, which is I think a lot of it's overflow. It can't get into my GP, right? So I'm going to go to urgent care. I also think there's folks with new pets, and they don't really know where to go. So these are, available. They're marketing really well. So I think I'm not sure these are really sort of short-term trends. I think they're here for the long term. And I think that the opportunity is for these groups to potentially find a way to, add in, I wouldn't be surprised if you start seeing urgent cares, add in that GP component even more, right? And I think the big interesting question is whether the specialty hospitals, and they've stayed away from this, most of them, right, have stayed away from this. We all know those outliers are out there. When or if they ever start to add in that GP component, and capture more of that other market. But today, there's a really clear line. Most specialty ER hospitals are not doing GP, although there's a famous one in Washington, and there are those groups out there that still do that.
Well, I have two comments about that. One, we should probably start an urgent care GP. It's kind of what I was thinking. But also, I think it's really interesting that you brought up an ER also wanting to do an urgent care tract. And I'm so intrigued as to, like, would the ER doctor kick a case to the urgent care doctor? And are the prices different? And that just sounds super complicated to me.
Didn't we have some of our clients that were ER only asking us for general practice doctors just to fill like an urgent care tract that they were creating, right? I mean, these ER hospitals are creating an urgent care ward where they're seeing GP overflow just because of the increased demand.
Yeah, I mean, they can't keep up. One of the interesting data points was that I think it was NVA. So their CEO was on a panel recently, and I was sort of listening in, and he was talking about general practices, and they have, I believe there are over 1,000 locations today now in the U.S. NVA. We're up pretty great numbers, like 10 to 12% in 2020, but their ER revenue was up 25 to 30%.
What?
The big driver for that was the intent. He described it as the intensity of medicine, meaning that the doctors were providing more sophisticated and costly care. They were seeing just massive demand and growth there.
And I think it's also a good point, like you said earlier, we're as general practitioners, we're so slammed, and like a blocked cat comes in, I'm like, all right, you're blocked. Go to the emergency hospital, because I don't have time to stop seeing appointments for even 20 minutes to do that procedure.
Whereas before, you used to have some empty spaces in your schedule where you can actually fit those kinds of things in. Now you can't.
Keep that revenue. Yeah.
How do you feel about that? Because, that's, again, if you talk to veterinarians that have been in industry for years, right, decades, right, they'll talk to you about in the beginning, they did everything, right? Because there were no stuff. The ER and specialty hospitals were far and few in between. And today, almost everything gets sent out, So as practicing doctors in our group, how do you guys feel about that?
I'm bummed about it, honestly, because I love that as a general practitioner, you get to do so much. And if that scope of work starts to narrow to just like wellness and, chronic cases only instead of some of those more urgent things, I think it just takes away a little bit of the fun, in my opinion. That's just my personal opinion.
I think it's interesting because I did used to do more procedures when I was in practice. But on the other hand, I think about 11 years ago when I first came out of school is when they started the big push of knowing when to refer and referring more. And so the new vets that are coming out aren't learning how to do as many cool things. They're learning how and when to refer. And if they can't do things at the highest standard, they're referring them. And so I think the newer vets don't even care to do those extra things. So I think they're happy about it. At least.
I think that's interesting. And I think that there's lots of different views on it, but you're right. Because a lot of our doctors, they just choose not to do surgery, right? They're happy not doing it. And so this is a great way for them to still practice high quality medicine and then be able to send the things that they don't choose to do anymore. So definitely some interesting.
It feels more like a human medicine hierarchy, which I think is great because I think there'll be more veterinarians more likely to be family medicine practitioners or general practitioners, but we have to find a way to make it more affordable and accessible for people to take their pets to a specialist or to the emergency room. And I think ultimately pets will get better care, but there's always going to be that price point. If we can figure that out, I think pets will ultimately get better care.
Well, Michael, it sounds like our industry is stronger than ever. We've talked a lot about some of the massive growth last year and hopefully this year. With growth comes some challenges, right? So what do you think are going to be the big challenges ahead to go along with some of this growth?
Like every industry that's growing, veterinary medicine has its challenges ahead, right? And to me, it's like thinking about how you're going to use new technologies or new services like IndeVets, for example, to help grow. Telemedicine, it's interesting, right, became a big thing in 2020. And I think there were a lot of companies that picked up traction, sort of sending out animal hospitals up. I personally remain kind of skeptical about it. I think I was listening again to the president and CEO of NVA, and he was saying that every NVA hospital has telemedicine capabilities now, but very few of them use it. So I think, figuring out how to take advantage of those types of tools. I think there's going to be this transition back from curbside to back into the hospital, hopefully in the second half of the year. And if not, early 2022, depending on where you are in the country, for example. And I think having to sort of get back to that world, I think is going to be really interesting because doctors today, are kind of able to do their work without that client, facing interaction, which, it just adds another dimension of work. And I think also, the competitive nature of this industry is just only increasing. You think about the need for these corporate groups to grow, and what that means is adding additional hospitals and additional doctors and marketing more. And, I think that at some point in our industry, there was a collegial view, right, of I'm not going to go into that market or that neighborhood or that town, because my colleague, Dr. Brunetti, right, or Dr. Heller is there. And I think some of that, sort of maybe nostalgic collegial approach, may be not so much there anymore. And so I think the competitive nature of the industry is only going to increase.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, Michael, it has been a pleasure, as always, chatting with you about our industry. I want to thank you for joining us today. Always an honor to have you, and I hope we will have you again very soon. And a big thanks to our listeners for joining us today. I've never said this before, but whatever platform you're on, if it lets you leave a comment, please do so. It's always great to hear from you guys. And subscribe so you can be alerted whenever we have a new episode.
Thanks, Andrew.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Michael. That was fun.